During the 1950s, a young man set out on foot to explore remote parts of southern Africa, determined to survive off the land. He would catch snakes as he walked through the bush and carried them around with him. As the tales of the snake man spread, he became known as Rradinokga, father of snakes.
I used to teach children painting, and one of my children that I was teaching's father, he told Adrian that there was somebody that he'd like me to meet, and so he introduced us. And, I met him, and we sort of got on very well, and then he disappeared again for a while. I thought, oh well, that's that. And then suddenly one day he came in carrying a huge piece of soapstone that he thought I might like to use to carve. And, he used to do this, come and go, come and go. And then after a while he stayed longer and we were chatting. Talked and talked and talked. And he told me about all his adventures, and I always had an adventurous idea of having my life. Then, I said, well, when are you going to take me into the Mokabeng? Because he'd been there once or twice, but he told me this was a marvellous place, it was very sacred and all that. And he said, oh no, he says, he never takes any women with him anywhere. In fact, he doesn't like to take anybody with him anyway. So I said, yeah, well, I'm different. I want to go with you.
Adrian Boshier was born in 1939 in Wiltshire in England and had attended a Spencer Chapman school where he had learned about survival skills. When his family emigrated to South Africa, it must have seemed like a paradise to him after the deprivations of post-war Britain, and an ideal place to try out these skills.
He came out when he was 16. He had always wanted to come to Africa. It was his dream. As soon as he got to South Africa, and they moved up to Joburg, he said he was at a party, I think, and he said to Enid, somebody's going up to the Northern, part of the way to the Northern Transvaal. I'm going along. I'm just going, and he just turned around, picked up his pack of his backpack with his knife, and I think he took a bag of salt with him, and 2 shillings. And they thought he was going off for the evening, and they didn't hear from him for ages.
Okay, well, we first came to our farm up at Nobwormspruit in 1955 with Tony Jeffries. Tall, very skinny. He was always very skinny. Never carried any extra weight, and excessively fit. He was just so fit it wasn't true. And always on the move.
But that was nothing unusual with Adrian, he'd rock up out of the blue. Just, hello, I'm here sort of business, or not even that. He'd just stalk into the house with his stalk movements. And he'd be staying with us for 2 months. And then he said, we'd see him dressed up in his boots and his socks.
Where are you off today, baby?
And I'm going to the Mokabeng. So off he went to the Mokabeng on foot. And then 2 months later he'd rock in, and I'm back again.
Ebele munaye mushowe sa jori bele mus emustelle musasana raskarar na bele afuta ma bele musho o musho wale khwakir.
And he roamed around that was when he was 16, 17. Anyway, he roamed more or less 7 years before I met him. With the Bushmen, he went to the Kalahari.
I had quite a big hunting operation on the Limpopo River. One day, suddenly, out of the blue, a chap arrives there one evening, in the middle of the night. And he says, my name's Adrian Boshier. He says, and all he had on was a khaki shirt and shorts, khaki shorts. And I looked at this man. He had a big nose. He looked like an eagle. And he had eyes like an eagle. And he had one blue eye and one brown eye, which I found intriguing. And I invited him in and gave him food and so on. In the meantime, in the evenings, we sat out there. And because being out there, you have these magnificent skies. You know, there's no city within 100 kilometers of anywhere. And you could see these beautiful stars. And there he told me something fascinating. You know, what is very prominent in the winter evenings in South Africa is the Southern Cross. And if you're a hunter and if you're in the bush a lot, the Southern Cross becomes a very important aspect in your life, because you know exactly where you are by just looking at the skies, and you can get back to exactly the same spot where you came from, walking in the veld at night. He said that the Bushmen called that the Pietsie, which means the zebra. And he told me that the Bushmen that he was associated with quite a lot in all his travels, and befriended a lot of Bushmen, that when they did paintings on the walls, they also marked the inside of the caves with the stars.
He talked about a time where he had to become invisible, and one of the Bushmen taught him how. And as the people were coming, the Bushmen and he got on their heads, stood on their heads against a tree and put their arms up like that. And so they took the shape, and they were unexpected, so they took the shape of the tree, and the people that were chasing them just went past. He was younger when he went, and they were the ones who mirrored something, because they lived in terms of a reality. They had in their inner landscape a sky and dimensions of what they called spirits.
I have a very clear memory of playing with Adrian on a couch, wrestling, having a whole lot of fun. And then suddenly he would almost freeze, and you'd get a very ashen and frozen expression on his face. And his eyes, you'd almost always see it in his eyes, he'd start to blink repeatedly. And you'd know that he was shifting into some kind of mysterious space, and my mother would rush the rest of the kids out of the lounge in that instance. And I'm not sure what she did. They were epileptic fits or akin to epileptic fits. I'm not sure any longer. But he had to be restrained. And then for a time afterwards, he was very removed, and no one engaged with Adrian much for a few days.
You know, he used to have these dreadful fits. I mean, anybody else who has epilepsy falls down, has his fit, and that's it. But Adrian would fall down, have a fit, and then just when you think it's getting over it, he would get up and start crashing around and bashing things and ripping curtains off, and I mean, totally wild. I never knew what he was doing, and he'd be shouting. I don't know whether at this time he'd be seeing the spirits or whatever it was.
It was his epilepsy that set him apart, which gave him an insight into Africa that most whites of his age and his time would never have experienced. Nkaleni taught him the African myth that if you have epilepsy, you are being called by the ancestors. But also it meant that he had to explore Africa in a different way. You know, because for tribal Africans, all whites went whizzing past in these capsules, you know, in a cloud of dust. And a white man on foot in a remote area was quite an unusual sight.
he was supposed to have these sort of powers, you know, which were extraordinary. I mean, he really did have extraordinary powers. He always knew the right moment to come at the right time, to have some sort of a magical meaning for other people. He had always caught snakes, and he'd always come, when I say he had these powers, he always came into a kraal when they just had a problem with snakes, and he would catch the snake. I mean, it was absolutely amazing. They wouldn't see snakes for months, and then when they'd seen a snake or there was a trouble with snake, their Rradinokga would come in.
Ha se no nna di bona o ya di tshwara ene o di tshwara wa hae o ya mo yona mo ngwa e khoma ka seeta jwale eme a e tshwara mo ngwa e shupa ka ntonyana so ya ema a e tshwara a e tšea phatha mo ra ka
by my in die tuin in 'n groot marula boom was daar 'n boomslang geweest, die groen mamba wat hulle sê. En het ek Boegie ook gebel. En hy het gekom en hy het in die boom agter die slam aangeklim. En as hy hier is, dan gaan die slang daai kant toe, dan gaan hy soontoe. So het hy heen en weer. Maar hy het 'n kort stokkie by hom gehad wat hy, as die slang hom wil pik, dan keer hy net so die stokkie weg. Maar nader aan toe keer hy hom bo in die punt van die boom vas. En toe gryp hy hom aan sy stert. Net as die slang pik na hom, dan keer hy. Maar toe kan hy nou nie die slang vang nie. Toe vat hy die slang sy stert en hy byt hom in sy mond vas. En toe so wegdruk toe, gryp hy hom agter sy kop. Maar die slang het hom so 'n byt gegee, maar nie diep nie. En daai slange laat jou mos bloei, dit is 'n verdun jou bloed.
Aba ba motse ba kudu ba khala yo ba mo a se na le ka bothata o rutile kudu kore o na le no engwe kholo lo fa o rile mo paletse e nya ka motho a ka e tshwara nga gone o e tshwara ile o ka re o le turuile mo di moso.
During the 1960s, Adrian Boshier often went to live in a rock shelter in the canyons of the Makabeng, from where he explored the plateau, immersing himself in the culture and traditions of remote rural areas.
Ele lo jahaje ba di beile hana ko we tsa utsuwa ke motho ke monno mongwana ka kwathola sukela sa dikwa o bile wa bo bothata aya o se ora a botse ke motho o ya o se ba re motho di tsere ke mokete aya aya ko a feta re hey ti shadilo jaka ba khomana ba re ke a dinya ka ba sa di bone mogala yo a teng a re ke patela ngwana ka pudi a hana a re ke patela ka khomo a hana mona a kenya ke khomo kenya ka ntwa jaka mo sebakeng a kwata a ntšhannoga ya mokopa a re ke ya talefetša bana e mang ke re bontšheng sampula a ya mo pudi mokopa o la lo mapudi pudi a šwa sometime batho ba tswa ba phatlalela wa tša.
When Adrian Boshier returned to Johannesburg, he met Professor Raymond Dart, whose discovery of the Australopithecus skull in the 1920s had made him world famous.
When I started my archaeology, I was at Wits University, working under Professor Dart. The thing that I remember about him, I mean, this is now a long time ago even, it's just his enthusiasm. He saw things, you know, in a different way than other people.
He came home one day and said, he'd met this fabulous fellow. And he went to the university and he was introduced to Prof. Dart. And Dart was busy at that time with bone knives. And he had a whole showcase of various knives, from fossil knives through to some Eskimo, I think, or, various knives around the world. And there was one bone knife from that was a fossil. Adrian said, he says, I've got one of those. He says, but this is a fossil. He says, well, I've got one that they're still using now. So Dart just did a dance. I mean, he was just so enthusiastic. He says, you're going right straight back. It was used for marula, for taking they're not allowed to use metal. Marula is a sacred fruit. And they were only allowed to use a bone knife to take the pip out.
Professor Dart offered Adrian Boshier a job, perhaps because he felt an affinity to this maverick. But he also realized that Adrian's connection with rural Africa was unique and gave him access to people and ideas inaccessible to other researchers.
Dart took him under his wing and he sent him up to... We spent a lot of time in Makapan. I should say almost a year on and off. We stayed in that little hut, excavating fossils.
He was carrying artifacts across a border, and he went to the bank, the local bank, and said, I need bags. And they said, we've got lots of bags. And the bags were money bags. And so he put the artifacts, the bones or whatever he was, the fossils, whatever it was he was collecting, in the truck, in these bags that said either rants or whatever they said, money. I don't know what they said. And he carried them to the border. And at the border, I think it was the customs official said, what have you got in those bags? You've got money in those bags. Or it might have been someone else, but he said, oh yeah, lots and lots of money. And they had this kind of And then the man said, can I see it? Can I see the money? And Adrian said, you can if you want, but do you really want to? If you see all that money, what will happen to you? What will happen to your spirit? And the man stood there and he said, no, you're right, Rradinokga, I don't want to see it. And Adrian said, good, okay, and went on.
When we got back to Joburg, we started the Museum of Man and Science with Adrian Brink, Dr. Adrian Brink. And, Adrian threw himself into that whole project with his usual enthusiasm. If he liked something, he would throw himself into it completely.
So when Professor Dart heard that there was some mining going to take place at this mine in Western Swaziland, this is the whole top of this mountain, which is made of pure hematite or iron or red ochre. He dispatched Adrian to go and find out exactly what was going on, and he came back to report, yes, there were all sorts of adits and quarries there that were all very ancient. And I made some inquiry, and there's potentially a problem because they're not going to let people in that area. It's a tribal area. And there's a local chief, and as far as I could gather, after the last excavators had left in the 40s, there'd been a drought or something, and he wasn't at all keen on another bunch of these chaps bringing another drought with them, so, we were going to have a problem. I mean, Adrian seemed to me to be the perfect person to go there. And he went there and he spent, I gather, or so he told me, who never knew with Adrian, some days chatting with the chief and his councillors, and then he brought it up, there were these, people wanting to go and dig in this cave again. And how did they feel about this? And, and apparently, again, according to him, they weren't at all very enthusiastic. So he assured the chief, while we were there, there would be no drought. And that's what he told me when he got back. And said, no, and after that, the chief and the councillor said, all right, well, if you can give us that assurance, you can come. The really strange thing was, we had sort of like the rains on and off during the whole month and a half we stayed there. It was just sort of like miraculous.
We were walking looking for rock art, and in the distance I saw the clouds over the Blauberg, and I said, if you're so damn clever, why don't you make those clouds come over and give us some rain? And he said, okay, I will. And he walked ahead of me and he started walking, and then he'd say, Bula, Bula, and he'd start calling it in, come on, Bula means open up. And he started sort of walking in this trance, and I walked behind. I thought, oh yeah. Anyway, the little breeze came up, and the clouds started coming over. And just when we reached a sort of little, it was like an entrance to a little arena of rocks, the clouds came over and they opened up, and it rained. And we just stripped, and it was so exciting when the rain came like that we danced. We just flung our arms out and we just did this rain dance. And then after a while we sheltered under a rock, and then the rain stopped, and the mist, from the heat of the rocks, there was a mist. And then as it cleared, we saw, now this is extraordinary, we saw a painting on the rocks of two figures doing a rain dance. They were flinging out their arms.
The Makabeng Plateau was an ideal living space for the San and Khoisan people, providing food and shelter, as well as a good view of the surrounding veld. To date, over 900 rock art sites have been found all over the mountain, many of which were first traced and catalogued by Adrian Boshier and Joan van Gogh.
He was an intuitive person, and most people don't listen to their intuition, and I think he did. He intuitively knew where a rock painting was. I mean, it was unreal. He used to say, let's go and sniff them out today, and we would be walking along. He said, there's one over there. I said, and we go up and we'd find it. And we actually discovered about 100 new sites.
Every region of southern Africa was occupied earlier by San people, and San people speaking a vast diversity of click languages. If you look at cultural sort of practices, you can certainly trace them back in southern Africa to at least 30,000 years ago.
The depiction of these shamans that Boshier found, he ended up saying this is the witch doctors of the Makabeng, referring to these shamans who's acquiring in a ngum from this impala. Normally, it is believed in the science society that they can chase an impala. They can chase it the whole day until it becomes completely exhausted. Then it will be unable to stand properly. Then if a shaman wants to acquire a ngum or a supernatural potency, he will go and grab it by its ears like it happens there and just suck the ngum out of that animal before perhaps it dies. So during the medicine dance, when a shaman goes into trance, they see themselves being transformed into that kind of an animal. And immediately when they sing those medicine songs, the ngum becomes activated. And once it becomes activated, it started to boil and rising along the spine. Once the ngum hit the area of the stomach, it causes a lot of pains. You'll see figures of human beings bending forward like this. Some shamans actually fall over. So by just holding on the two dancing stick, it gives you support that you can continue dancing until that ngum passes the stomach and go along the spine and eventually hit the back of your brain. So what happened is that immediately when it hits the back of your brain, a person goes into full trance.
I have this vision, if I look back at it, like there's the center of people dancing and dancing and dancing, and the colors that are coming off it, and the spirits and the dimensions and the beings and the places swirling through it. I mean, he saw the spirits, you know. Whatever, he saw those dimensions. He interacted with them unconsciously when he was in an epileptic state, and then willingly when he was dancing. That's how he could go up to a snake and catch it.
We'd been to the Makabeng several times, and we suddenly saw this fellow sitting, looking at a dry little stream. And he was, in fact, we didn't even see his face. He was just sitting. And Adrian just knew it was Modisha. I don't know how. He never met him before. He went up to him. He didn't even see his face. He just said, "Hey, Modisha." And Adrian just spoke to him as if he'd known him all his life. He said, "Yes." He says, "I know what you're thinking." And he said, well, what am I thinking? And he said, "Well, you're thinking that they don't beat the drums anymore, and that's why there's no more rain." So he said, "It's just what I was thinking. It's just what I was thinking." And so he set up a ceremony. That he had found in one of his previous trips, he'd found these sacred drums.
Rradinokga monna yo ba a tsamaya le thaba tse a tshwara dinoga a di lokela ka gare a bag. Ntho a re di rekeng yona ya botlhokwa ile ra mo leboa gore o humile ke kwamana e a e khumana kwa nageng e se bona mo dikwamaneng gona a tulo botsa thabela mogopi.
And nobody would tell him what it was about, and then slowly he got from them that they had hidden these drums at the time the missionaries actually came to Africa, to that area. So he got them to bring the drums out. He went all the way to Bamboo Ridge to get Rradinokga and bring it back to them because they needed the ochre for their ceremonies.
O feta mo ya bo motho a re nano fela a re etela ka mantswe a ipontshang gore batho ba masedisika la lebala thungwa tsa lena di shumishe.
They beat the drums and it rained. So they knew of his powers, and he then met this witch doctor woman. Her name was Rasibi. She was an older lady, and she was very strong, Sangoma, very spiritual, and she wanted to start training him. And so he had an initiation. But Adrian didn't talk to me about it either. He wouldn't tell me. He was sworn to secrecy.
The problem is, to become a Sangoma, it has to be a genuine calling. You don't simply wish to become a Sangoma and become one. It's like you are in prison. Nothing that you want to do can be done. You will be told what to do. Once your ancestors' spirits have occupied you, if they are not satisfied where you are, they will have to guide you out of that place to where they want you to be. When nature has something to tell you, there are always people who will be able to understand what nature is saying to you. And they will tell you. It is up to you to find, as I told Adrian Boshier of what was going to happen. Those people are always there. It's only that it's too difficult to believe because you have a lot of other things to believe in.
Ya wana ke mawina mokwete mo lefatsheng le ke ntseng gona ke sadu Rradinokga re a mo tseba ba phela ka ešo a phela ka ešo Rradinokga ha thoma o ta ntse a nyaka ya le dithaba a ya mashopeng a ešo kwa godimo a thaba ye ya go ya Tebele o na le mashope a ba ra kgolokhuku kwa a sepela mo ona ka re be le motho a sepelang ka mohae a bona a sa sepele botse a tshwenya ke benyimathoko wa balala a theoa a ta kwa ešo a fitha kwa ešo a feta a bolela taba ewe a re ke nyaka modimo o ke reng ke sepela kwa thabeng a nyako nkgobatša ka lerumo a tsena kwa ešo bomma ke re be e ba bina be le ngaka e le Lelepompe a nyakana le badimo ba bomma ra isibe ba nyakeya he le bona bile le bitse ba bomma ka mo kwa ba nyakeya balala bata mo batho ba bina Rradinokga a nyaka pudi ka bo yena e thaba ra tharija pudi bomma ba bina gore a kgone go tsena kwa mahaheng ale gore ba mo lotšhetša ka balala gore a tsena kwa mahaheng ale ka nnete go tloa mo motho wa modimo a e tsena be re phela le ene nako efe Rradinokga a ta toa boya a romela bomma mahlotse a wina a ba romelana mo bata wa mo tseba mokgekolo o bile ba tšere dinepe le ane o tše nepe sa bomma e le ka sekhumana ke seba ba fotileng ke ene Rradinokga a le ka mo ba kgalajwe Rradinokga a se o thwasišitšwe ya re o toa mo hae mo a boela kwa a ta a boya a romela bomma ha ba romela mathotse ya a ba botša le gore ke thwasišitšwe a romela le bana ba hae ba ata mo bana ba Rradinokga ke ba tseba ba thaba ba pere mo kgophana wa pholo ewe e khibidu e ba a lafiwa ka yona a nakwa kwa ba le gona a se a thwasišwe ke bomma monnola ke lesiba rena be re bitša lesiba Rradinokga
I never thought something will come out of my body, but it did came one day. And as from that day, I felt different. When this spirit came out and spoke and introduced itself, what's its name? The rest is history. Because when that happened, that is when I knew this is real. I never thought it, and yeah.
We always knew when somebody was coming in the valley. You know, when you're in a quiet place like that, I don't know if you found that, you just can sense a change in the feeling, in the atmosphere. Anyway, we knew that somebody was coming, and it was Odisha. And he came and he was very, very upset. He said, there's a witch doctor who's putting a curse on us, and he's already, the lightning has already struck my cattle. 2 of my cows have died. And please, can you come and lift this curse? So we told him to come back later on in the afternoon, and we would come and we'd follow him. So we poured out some cordite from bullet that we had, and put some film, cut up a bit of film, and made things that were sort of flammable, and wrapped it all up in a bit of dusty skin, shoved it in. A big snail shell those big white snail shells. And then we walked over to, of course we had puffs, the puff adder. He had a puff adder that Adrian had caught in a bag. And so we carried puffs along, and we went off to this village, and he came in the afternoon. We followed him all the way to his little kraal. They all went into their huts, and Adrian had a little bowl of water, which he sort of made a little, flapped his hands over, and it was now very strong water. And he went and splashed this over all the houses, the entrances of the houses. And then he took puffs out, and he milked puffs onto his tongue. I nearly fricked, I did. Anyway, and then he spat on all these places. You see, now this was by this time the witch doctor's eyes were like this. He was cowering, he was watching from one of the darkened entrances of the doors. And it was dead silent. And then I took the shell to the middle where their fireplace is, and I lit it. And at first nothing happened, then this white plume came out. And then suddenly it sparked as it hit the cordite, and then big black oily plumes came out, and then I had to throw it over the wall, and then we walked out without saying a word, strode out, and that was it. And this guy, the next day, Modisha came, he said, "Curse is lifted, the witch doctor's gone, everything's fine now, it's wonderful."
I think in a way I was quite frightened of him. In between meals once, I looked into the fridge and he walked in and he caught me. And he really came down on me hard and called me a sissy and told me to get out the house and punished me for really just for being a child. And I never understood that. So I made it my quest to go and try and undo that, and found a way to almost call him up in my psyche and say, "Right, fella, we're going to have a talk about this." And the answer that I got for him was because he was embarrassed because the fridge was empty. For me, certainly, it made him more human. That he was fallible, he had these things. He just didn't choose to, he wanted to be something else.
He was crazy. He could be absolutely crazy and make you laugh. But he was, that's the nice side of him. He had a dark side. He was very egocentric, I thought, and very difficult to be married to, as a matter of fact. We got on really well. It was great, but the children was a barrier to him. Didn't leave him his freedom and his space. I didn't give him enough space, actually. I mean, I loved the adventure, I loved doing with him, but I should never have lived my life for him. That was a big mistake. In fact, when we parted, I said to him, what was one of the worst things I ever did to make our marriage break up. And he said, "Well, you said you just always did everything for me." I said, "It's because I love you." He said, "Yeah, but you shouldn't have done it."
He had this house that was very sort of rudimentarily constructed, but out of railway sleepers. He had what he used to call his guard dog.
No, his dog.
His dog.
Yeah.
Which was his way of protecting the property, which was a snake.
And he kept it in this glass pyramid.
Yeah, which was just downstairs on the stoop. And it was an amazing thing, because if you stood in front of it absolutely still, it would just lie there. But if the minute you moved, it would start getting really, really angry, and then it would sort of get up, and it would strike at you, and it would hit the glass, and this venom would just sort of drool down the front of the glass.
It was enraged. It really loathed humans. And if you then, after having struck the glass, and you went away, and and even half an hour later you came back and looked, it was still staring in the direction in which you disappeared. It really wanted to get you.
I was sitting in Soweto, And we had gone to deal with something. And there was Robert Shabalala and Adrian and me. And Adrian went in to deal with it. And it was scary, whatever it was. This guy was an enemy of some kind. I didn't really understand. And he was gone for a long time, and it's hot and, boring. And I said to Robert, at some point I said, I'm afraid, because I think that man, he wants to harm Adrian or something. But I remember what Robert said. He turned around, because I was in the back seat. And he said, it's good to have enemies. Rradinokga has enemies, and that's a good thing. And I said, how can that be a good thing? And he said, no. He said, it gives you power to have enemies. But the power is only there if you do nothing. If you know this is your enemy and you do nothing, you get great power. And Rradinokga will not do anything, and therefore he will keep his power.
Politics somehow was something he just didn't want to be part of at all. But for him, tribal Africa made total sense, complete and utter sense. Its attitudes, how it coped with people, its beliefs, that made total sense. And I think for Adrian, he would like never to have seen that change. So he had this extraordinary connection with a foot in each world.
I came back home. It was riot time. And the situation, I knew of the riots because I saw them before they happened. I saw a river of blood, and I woke up. I said, I have to tell my teacher this. And in the morning, I told him. I told my tutor, because the teaching there is that in the morning when you wake up to go and greet your teacher, if you have a dream that you want to share, that's the time. Because you have to have witnesses with your dreams, because there's a lot of message in the dreams, and that message is genuine because it is kept in you. You see? So you have to have a good understanding of what that message is all about. That kind of message, you don't have to go out and go and seek advice. It is from you. So your teacher will help you how to interpret these dreams.
I was fundraising for the museum. The museum had no funding, but the big problem was the city council was under a strong nationalistic thing at the time. And the treasurer at the time, I think his name was Oosthuizen, he cut the funding to the art gallery. He totally cut the museum. And that was that. And without that funding, we were finished. And when the museum closed, he kind of floundered. He just wasn't this big booming center of everybody's world anymore. Of his own world, yes, but not of that other world.
He told me of his history in Botswana and Silipe and how he was given the nickname of Rradinokga by the Tswanas in the villages there, because and there was something else that I've noticed. He was sort of anti-white. I asked him, why? He looked at me, didn't answer me. I didn't want to go further. I knew there was something that was done to him that made him to shy away from the rest and be with, or maybe they couldn't understand what was in his mind, what he was talking about and things like that. Then he said to me, I want you to throw bones for me. I said, no problem. And then we went outside. There was a tree there. And for me, it was real good that I was under that tree with him. I rolled my classmate and then asked him to say his name and surname and blow. He did that. And then I took the bones and I threw them for him. There wasn't much, but the little that came out was a warning. And I told him that, you know, before you go to the river or the sea, you need a special ritual so that those energies that you already possess in you, which are in these places I'm talking about, the river and the sea, cannot pull you down.
Mapedi wrote to him, Rradinokga. I got the letter, I didn't open it because I thought it was some, I don't know. I finally opened it, I brought it out to sleepers. It said, Rradinokga, you are in danger, the spirits need you to do the next initiation. And I said, but if you do the right thing for your spirits, they'll take care of you. And he said, don't you believe it? The spirits don't care about that level. So he made a choice not to go. And the part of it that I can say is that he thought it might change him in a way that was too alien to him. And he knew what happened when you don't listen to your spirits. You know, here you don't listen to your spirits, you turn into a jerk. There you don't listen to your spirits, you die, or you lose your spirit.
Yes, he used to see spirits and see. He once told me he had this very evil woman sit next to him in the car and had to stop and throw her out. She was a spirit.
Adrian organised an event out at his place called Sleepers. So he brought in a number of Sangomas, some from Soweto and around Johannesburg. And then the great occasion was that his teacher from the Makabeng Mountains was making the journey down to come to this thing. And she arrived, and I just remember this incredibly formidable woman and an entourage of Twasas. The occasion had that one ostensible purpose, but also quite obviously she was there to talk to Adrian because it seemed as though she had a very serious subject on her mind, and Adrian was going probably through the worst of his physical struggles, and I think it was kind of talked about then that he needed to go through other levels of initiation in order to either exorcise or integrate what was happening to him. And he was afraid of it, I remember. I remember that clearly because that was a kind of a surprise, because there were not many things that he was afraid of. And that one he seemed to fear. Now, I don't know whether that fear was because of what the initiation entailed, or perhaps I had a kind of feeling that he thought it could actually kill him.
A couple of months before he died, we were in the bush, and there were lots of apes, monkeys, chimpanzees, I don't know what they were, but they were very noisy at night, and he was agitated by it. And then later, and I didn't understand, because he was never frightened, ever. when we went to Sangoma Bay. He was very flat and a bit lost. He'd had an attack the night before we went, and he was trembling, and I put blankets and blankets and blankets on him, and he was very he was terrified, and he said, I'm afraid. And he said, and I said, were you afraid in the bush the other day? And he said, yeah, and I'd never been afraid before, never. And I can only think now that he was close to death, and so layers were being removed or stripped off. But then, getting close to death, you know.
Adrian Boshier died of heart failure while he was diving.
And then afterwards, when the man who went into the sea with him and pulled him out, who was, you know, a pilot, you know, a straight guy, he said, I saw him after he died, you know. And he said he blinked in that funny way with his eyelash, he had one white eyelash, and he said he blinked and he looked at me and he said, that wasn't so bad. So I thought, phew, okay, you're through.
Adrian's funeral took place on a Friday afternoon. It was the last slot of the day in these sort of incinerating battery funeral places that they have in Johannesburg. And it was the main chapel, and it was filled with people. And this being in the days of apartheid, in the back row were all the Sangoma friends of Adrian's. And the service started, and it was truly depressing because it was the sort of Dove's renter priest who got up and sort of muttered away, and one literally felt like dying oneself because everybody there, you could feel them withering as they thought this had nothing to do with Adrian. And then at a point when the priest was going to press the button to take the coffin away, and Kaleni, one of the Sangomas in the back row, suddenly bellowed, "Wait!" And she was in her traditional Sangoma robes, which meant that she was naked from the waist up and had a fly whisk. And a whole group of the Sangomas then surrounded the coffin. All the little officials who were running the place, these little shutters opened and people peered out and gazed in horror at what was going on. The sort of Swart Gafar were taking over the funeral chambers. And then they danced around Adrian's coffin and sang, and when Kaleni said they'd done enough, she then turned to the priest and said, "You can press the button now."
I was in Johannesburg last week and just driving past where we used to live and remembering it was next door to the Museum of Man and Science, and there was this flood. They were doing some roadworks and we had this long driveway, and remember him lying naked in the mud and having a mud bath and things like that, and the sense of having fun as well. But certainly I do feel I have a stronger relationship with him. I feel truly protected, and certainly have a relationship with a dead person in that way that I think he's there.
And Adrian said that in animals you have the same thing. You have this perception. Every time that an animal was killed, you felt that the whole bush became quiet for a moment. Adrian made me aware of all these things. And that is one of the reasons why I stopped hunting. Now, in the same way, Adrian could talk to animals. And I went with him one day to the bush, and he says, "Now watch this." And it was just after sunset, and he said, "Look, I'm going to show you something. The wind is blowing in the right direction or something." And he says, "Now I'm going to go to the leader of this." The global beast was standing there. "I'm going to go to the leader of it, and I'm going to make him look at me, and I'm going to look at him." and you'll see how far I go. He said, but you just stay here and go very quietly. And he sort of went into, he could sort of, I don't know, I could feel he went into a sort of a trance. And he walked right up to this blue wildebeest. And he went to the old big bull. And he went so close that their noses were mostly touching. And then I saw him going like that, and the blue wildebeest, his head always goes like that. Now they would look like they were talking to each other. And then he slowly turned around and he came back to me. I said, Adrian, come on, man, what's this? He says, no, I talked to them.
When a person dies, a rain starts falling, filling, erasing his living footsteps, filling the hollows of a dead man's footsteps, so the footsteps themselves will no longer be there. All trace is erased of the spoor that we knew.